As you know, ketogenic diets are basically two things: high fat and high protein. And that's how you stimulate the ketogenic factors in the body. So
There'd be some people that would say high fat, but then some people say more moderate protein just because they're trying to modulate gluconeogenesis. And some people are talking about the fact that you can increase glucose a little bit just through gluconeogenesis. So is there a
yes,
percent protein that you like for a ketogenic template?
I've always say that it's again the amount of energy that you expire and the type of physical activity you do
Mm-hmm.
during the day. So if you're more of a weightlifter or more of a bicyclist or somebody, you're going to need a little more protein than somebody who's not working in exercise field as much. But you want to make sure that we found that after age of 60, the requirement for protein is much greater at that age than any other
Right.
age. So you want to make sure when you're over 60, you start consuming more protein than fats. And the problem with fats is, fats are very highly unstable, unless you eat some
Saturated fats.
saturated fats, right? But there's
Yep.
also a minimum amount. They found that too much fats, of even saturated fats, can cause problems. So you have to know how to control that, and you got to take certain antioxidants like vitamin E to help the lipid oxidation factors of
Yeah,
any
vitamin C.
fats.
Yep.
Yeah. So the one I found was really good is ghee butter. Ghee butter seems to give you more balance. It has a lot of antioxidants, vitamin E, beta carotene, and it's clarified, so it is a different form of fat, and it helps accumulate a faster metabolism in the body, and so does MCT oil. Using those two will help with facilitate, but you don't want to take too much. You want to be in the right ranges. So I think fats are important, but don't overdo it with too much, because it can cause later on with lipid oxidation. And it doesn't make a difference what form of fats, because and then you have free fatty acids, which are signaling factors to aging anyway.
And then how does that affect the mitochondria? I've heard that, glucose kind of is a more dirtier fuel to kind of burn regarding oxidation, and fat's a little bit more of a cleaner fuel. I know there's a book by Christopherson called Tripping Over the Truth. It's about cancer, and he looks at cancer as being a mitochondrial issue. And he talks about fats essentially being one, you're not fueling the cancer as well, but two, you're burning a cleaner fuel source.
It's interesting with cancer, because that's probably one of my more concern and interest in. I had more experience since 1980 in researching cancer as anybody else, because of my father passed away. It's the Otto Warburg principle, where sugar is not the problem here. It's the utilization, the respiratory chain, the Krebs cycle, the mitochondria. The mitochondria does not use the electrons correctly. It doesn't oxidize glucose correctly. So it takes fat and protein and accumulates those into energy, and it goes into glycolysis. And instead of oxidation of glucose, which is the normal Krebs cycle pathway for everything in the mitochondria, NAD plus goes up when oxidation of glucose occurs, when electron donation is properly there. The byproduct, the pyruvic acid, is not being converted right and goes into lactic acid. So it's where if you don't supply the body enough sugar, the body goes into a different mechanism and utilizes free fatty acids in its energy cycle. And that is the problem with cancer cells. When you accumulate too much free fatty acids from protein and from fats, it utilizes it to break it down to energy, but the end component becomes lactic acid instead of CO2. And CO2 is a major mechanism for respiratory function to convert back to normal function again. And if we don't have enough CO2, and that's why high altitude people live longer and they have less diseases and mortality, because they're accumulating much more CO2 in their blood. And if we can raise that CO2 levels, that's the secret, and increase the oxidation of glucose, which is what Warburg says is the key component. And that's where NAD comes into play. And that's how it works more efficiently, by using niacinamide, because niacinamide is a precursor to NAD plus, and it also inhibits free fatty acids.